Hello, I am Addie Gordon, PhD candidate in Art and Architectural History at Binghamton University. Today, I will be presenting my work entitled A Singular Logic, Narrative Transformations in the Relocation of Expo 92's Galician Pavilion. On April 20th, 1992, the Universal Exposition of Seville opened as the first event of its kind since the World's Fair in Osaka, Japan in 1972. Expo 92 celebrated the quincentennial of Columbus's arrival in the Americas with the theme The Age of Discoveries, inviting each of the participants to show off the many dimensions of human exploration and culture from the previous 5 centuries. The centerpiece of the exposition was the artificial Spanish lake surrounded by 17 pavilions dedicated to each of Spain's autonomous regions. Each defined their identities in conversation with their autonomy, Spain, and supranational unity. Among these, Galicia's response focused largely on the cultural heritage and iconography of its famous medieval pilgrimage route, the Camino de Santiago, framing it as an established narrative of unity with ongoing, deeply historical relevance as the route continued to grow in popularity in preparation for the upcoming 1993 Holy Year. The Galician Pavilion is unique among the buildings of Expo 92, for it was reconstructed back in Galicia's capital, Santiago de Compostela, at the close of the Expo and repurposed as the home of the Gestión do Plan Xacobeo, the organization put in charge of planning and managing events for Xacobeo 93 and all subsequent Holy Years. In many ways, reusing the pavilion for this purpose interrupts the motif that was established in the moment of Expo 92 and was accordingly reflected through its architecture. This paper examines how the building and the connotations about unity and pilgrimage that it evokes shifts in its 2 different environments. Designed by Galician architect José Antonio Franco Taboada, the Galician Pavilion stands 21 meters tall and is composed of mainly granite and glass. The structure comprises 2 design motifs. The main entrance and view of the pavilion mimics an ancient hypothral or open-air temple, and the interior structure, nestled in the bulk of this outer temple, is tall, square, and faced with glass. The thick outer facade of granite presses against a wide, bulky staircase that forms a rooftop terrace about a third of the way up the inner structure, allowing more engagement with the entire pavilion. The weight of the outer walls is repeated again in the inner facade with 2 oblong columns of glass and metal that flank the main entrance of the structure and contain interior staircases. The appearance of the building is lightened by the addition of a metalwork canopy that bridges the outer walls. This canopy features a metal frame with 2 layers of overlapping small, mirrored panels and is repeated in its reflection on the central glass building. The open-air design of the pavilion intimates the way in which Galicia related with the federal and international goals of the exhibition. By jointly celebrating the global exploration 5 centuries earlier and the coming new millennium, the goals of Expo 92 were primarily to promote not only the past discoveries humankind had made, but the discovery of the potential of the newly formed European Union, and more specifically, how Spain would champion and contribute to this new pact. Just as Spain led the world during the Age of Exploration, now too, at the turn of the century, it would become a leader in this new pan-European venture. The championing of Spanish culture was not unique to Expo 92. With Madrid's designation as a European capital of culture and Barcelona hosting the Summer Olympics, 1992 has been seen as the year in which Spain announced its re-entry onto the world stage. Galicia also sought to demonstrate its connection with the goal of unifying Spain and the world by promoting the means through which the region had always connected with Europe, the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. Their actions to this end were twofold. They first sought to construct a view of the pilgrimage as a hub for cultural interaction and pan-European understanding throughout history. Furthermore, their demonstration at the Expo and beyond sought to extrapolate this view onto the contemporary state of the pilgrimage as the cultural linchpin of contemporary Galicia. To that end, the structure's use of granite and its directional emphasis towards the sky conveys the permanence of Galicia's own temple to St. James in two very obvious ways. First, granite, the essential local material in almost all of Santiago de Compostela's architecture, connects the structure to Compostela's urban form. Secondly, the emphasis on the open-air temple and its star-like canvas recalls both one of the Jacobean pilgrimage origin myths and its consequent celestial directional thrust, the path of the Milky Way. At the Pavilion of Galicia, this connection to the pilgrimage route continues throughout the interior of the structure. Much of the promotional material inside the pavilion emphasized Santiago de Compostela and Galicia's ties to the Way of St. James. In particular, Compostela's role as a long-time destination for travelers and its subsequent cosmopolitanism was stressed throughout the exhibition. The direct connection to the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela recalls then a long-standing historical, yet intricately politically constructed view of Galicia as a center of pan-European engagement. Similarly, the architecture physically invites interaction, beckoning to Galicia's ongoing commitment to cultural promotion and understanding through the continued use of the pilgrimage route. The open-air pavilion's interior staircases were open to the public to walk up and down, exploring the building and thus Galicia from multiple angles and viewpoints. As a visitor ascends the staircase, the play of light becomes more evident both on the canopy and in its reflection in the glass. The field of stars resides in two places at once, both in Galicia's past and now foregrounded in its present in Seville and at home. Although subtle, these design choices are politically charged, especially in relation to the two other pavilions of the historic nationalities positioned beside Galicia's, where the global stage presented to other regions an opportunity to demonstrate their independence. Directly to the right of the Pavilion of Galicia stood the Pavilion of Catalonia, whose intentionally distorted floor plan represented a resistance to the urban grid. The entrance of the building includes commissioned graffiti, with the architects intended to reflect Catalonia's proposal for the ultimate discovery of humankind. That is, freedom and the right to exercise it. Here, idealistic views of a regionally inspired unified Spain and Europe were displaced by a forthright display of moral authority in the form of access to fundamental rights. Likewise, directly beside the Pavilion of Catalonia, the Pavilion of the Basque Country boldly represented ideas of freedom and independence within its design. Here, the rectangular building's facade takes the form of an abstracted Icarina, or Basque national flag. This autonomous region's entry into the European Union is proudly displayed on the building's facade, through the unity and unique character of the Basque Country. The design and architecture of the pavilion does not incorporate any of the subtle nods towards pan-Europeanness or ecumenicism promoted by Galicia. Rather, the message displayed is wholly and singularly Basque. These bold statements, juxtaposed beside the Galician pavilion, were especially emphasized during Galicia's Day of Recognition, when then President of the Junta de Galicia, Manuel Fraga, described how the pavilion and its exhibits demonstrated Galicia's renewal and its embrace of Spanish federalism, in contrast to, say, the Basque separatist movement. Quote, "Today, Galicia is recovering its historical and cultural identity in an exemplary and balanced fashion by reclaiming its freedom without sterile inferiority complexes or overly aggressive and arrogant attitudes that are scarcely efficacious and lack solidarity." End quote. Despite these strong connections drawn between Fraga's federalist views and amicable Spanish unity, he also exclaimed at the fair's opening ceremony that the role of the expo was not just to promote human achievement, but also to exemplify the Europe of the autonomies. With a Jacobean-inspired design drawn from Galicia's historical connotation as a place of exchange for European culture, the regions showing at the Expo demonstrated the Xunta's underlying goals for maintaining the status quo of Galicia's engagement to broader politics by utilizing pilgrimage iconography. Here, the establishment of Galicia as a fundamental building block of European history both erases other historical trajectories and smooths differences in political policy, situating contemporary Galicia into a longer narrative of European engagement. Following the close of Expo 92, with most of the other structures and pavilions left to ruin, the Xunta de Galicia took a tangible step to maintain a connection with the Expo by carefully transporting the pavilion back to Galicia. There, it was eventually re-erected near where the Camino enters Santiago de Compostela proper and made the home of the newly created Gestión do Plan Xacobeo, or the Xacobeo Group. While in previous years, the management of and preparation for each year's pilgrims was shared between the Archdiocese and the Ministry of Tourism. In recognition of the record number of pilgrims expected for 1993, the Xacobeo was formed in 1991 as a separate and distinct organization, wholly dedicated to this purpose. Xacobeo manages all advertising and event organization surrounding major holy years, also confusingly referred to as Xacobeos from 1993 onwards. It publishes guides to Santiago de Compostela for pilgrims and tourists, and, in conjunction with the cathedral's pilgrim office, maintains records regarding the number of travelers along the Camino each year. Choosing to reconstruct a building for the newly created tourism organization reveals the local government's perception of the long-term success of the Xacobeo program and also aligns the newly recoined Xacobeo with the larger transnational ideals presented at Seville. In all of these changes, it is clear that the Xunta foresaw great success for this new program and the Xacobeo rebranding. On the whole, the initiative has been successful in its husbandry of the route, continued maintenance over the past 3 decades, and ongoing cultural production in and around Compostela. Ultimately, the goal of this new campaign was to intertwine the promise of unity and discovery both from Seville and at home, specifically by physically manifesting Galician identity through pilgrimage, and then resurrecting this identity within the actual landscape of pilgrimage. It is, however, in housing itself in this iconic structure that these aims come into question. At this time, the city government was also actively and successfully initiating municipal works to preserve the city's history and to help transform the sleepy town into a cultural destination of the 1990s. Specifically, then Mayor of Santiago de Compostela, Gerardo Estevez, himself a practicing architect, had undertaken long-term urban renewal, advocating that Compostela preserve and transform itself, and encouraged urban development and growth by emphasizing the city's historical and contemporary planning, its architecture, and its culture. Estevez's initiatives preserved the historic city center, resulting in 2 UNESCO World Heritage designations, created municipal spaces and administrative offices, renewed public space with infrastructure and parks, and all the while facilitated the construction of several important civic works. These large-scale projects had been a core component of Estevez's 1989 general plan for the city, which focused on creating high-quality architecture to help shape the layout of a contemporary Compostela, one both navigating a rich cultural history and primed for new contemporary engagements. Within this plan, there was an emphasis on cultural pluralism where sensitivity to the past while encouraging new encounters with the city and its citizens was key to all forms of intensive planning that went into the city's revitalization. However, the Xunta's goals of connecting to Europe are distinct from their city-affiliated counterparts. While the Xunta and the city government often collaborated on these large-scale urban revitalization initiatives, the Fraga administration slowly began to shift the official cultural narratives to focus solely on marketing the Camino de Santiago above all other Galician cultural offerings. This shift came with a larger portion of the cultural budget now devoted to projects, infrastructural, programmatic, and architectural that fit within the landscape of Compostela as a hub of pilgrimage-based cultural tourism. Within this system, Any dynamism was lost as systems of wealth interconnected public policy with political actors, leading to a folklorized Galician culture where tradition and cosmopolitanism were the representational motifs of the regional populist right governing Galicia, thus stifling any other form of representation in the region. By the first few years of the 1990s, the cultural logic of Fraga was made evident, that the arts, both past and present, could be integrated into one project which would use culture to promote tourism to the region. Fraga's cultural policy depended heavily on a belief in the profitability of culture as an economic stimulus, as well as catering to private entities. In this system, consumption rather than cultural representation was the ultimate goal, with overt control put in the hands of the administration. The changes occurring at this time through Galicia's spatial and visual production went beyond making the pilgrimage more ecumenical. In fact, in its new location, the historic thrust of the pavilion's canopy of stars is overshadowed by corporate logos of pilgrimage, highlighting more a municipal venture for economic gains rather than historic unity. Rather than a sense of pilgrimage communitas, the build-up to 1993 demonstrates a focus on touristic promotion of this final leg of the Camino. However, it would be a mistake to consider this merely a marketing strategy because it also expresses deeply felt connections to Europe, and it should be noted, some palpable aversions to recent Spanish history. Because of the nation's fascist past and the regional autonomies established in the post-Franco period, the idea of a European Spain was promoted as a way of formulating nationhood free of the associations with nationalistic rhetoric. Contemporary Spanish identity is burdened by associations with the perceived backwardness of the Franco era and concerns of a period underdeveloped to outsiders. The concept of Europe provides a means of legitimization for the Spanish identity, not just in the political or economic spheres, but also in relation to the nation's emotional state, especially as it takes form regionally. For Spain, the reformation of its identity under the guise of Europe represents a way of reestablishing the national and regional self-respect lost during the early 20th century. However, the pavilion's relocation directly interrupts the motifs established in its architecture that directly echoed these sentiments at Expo 92. In its new location, in its role as home to the Jacobeo Group, it lies down a side street in a business park where, for pilgrims nearing the end of their journey, this monument to the canopy of stars that they have been following across northern Spain is entirely out of view, out of mind. As such, while the Expo building is almost practically removed from the pilgrimage landscape that it references, it is emblematic of the larger systematic cultural production overhaul of Galicia that occurred during the Fraga administration of the 90s. One which would act as an agent and producer of a specifically globally branded Compostelan culture, shored up within a framework of a cultural democracy. In Galicia, the narrative of pilgrimage espoused at the Expo, that is, at the Expo, the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela functioned as Galicia's credentials for contemporary transnational unity, one which emphasized Galicia, however narrow of a representation, now becomes a continuation of the pilgrimage motif for the self-promotion of the Jacobeo Group and by extension the efforts of the Fraga administration. The Expo building began the Junta's ongoing cultural policy of utilizing the values of spectacle in the Camino within an architectural schema to demonstrate Galicia's modernization through tradition and image. Here, the overt connection between history and architecture are used as a political marketing tool to Europe, specifically one with traditional and moralistic overtones. That the Camino could attract visitors to Galicia by foregrounding its historical and cultural importance became the singular logic behind the late 20th century transformations of Compostela and resulted in several large-scale architectural projects in relation to the pilgrimage route, culminating in the 1999 announcement of Compostela's own Starchitecture project with Peter Eisenman's City of Culture of Galicia, whose design contains the same symbolic preoccupations of historical pilgrimage motifs found in the Expo 92 building. This branding via architecture seems key to the government's choice of Eisenman's proposal, as, like the relocated Galician pavilion, it overtly utilized typologies of the pilgrimage, thus facilitating the political underpinnings of the specific cultural ideologies supported by the Junta by stylistically omitting all other elements of contemporary Galicia. Thus, the pavilion, when located in Galicia, functions as a monument to the ideals Fraga espoused at Expo 92 rather than the ideals of the Expo itself. More than demonstrating the differences between city and state about what constitutes Galicia's European values, it instead solidifies the haunting persistence of Fraga's influence over Galicia's cultural policy and international presence, including the elements of the region's reputation made visible to the rest of the world. Furthermore, removed from the context offered by its placement at Expo 92, this one-time landmark of unity's specific architectural vocabulary is underutilized and now lies vacant among the business parks of San Lazaro. The reinvention of the Pavilion of Galicia in this new location culminates, in fact, in a misinterpretation of the architecture. What once stood in Seville as a concrete materialization of unity throughout Europe and beyond, instead misaligns its architectural connection to pilgrimage to become an out-of-the-way monument to the organizational exigencies of Galician cultural policy. Thank you.